Hello and welcome to this edition of Dealing with Brightspace. And this particular topic is really geared toward some of you who may have seen the other video that I did about learning outcomes and how to embed those into your course and then attach them to different assignments. Now, one of the things that I've discovered about that is that the evaluation as to whether or not the item that you've attached your learning outcome to is evaluated is separate from any grading rubric or anything that you have there. It's not just going to pick up the grade that you gave them and assign it to that learning outcome. You have to go in and evaluate each one of those learning outcomes. The neat thing is it's built right into the process of the grading mechanism itself. So when you go to grade something, whether you have a grading rubric for it or not, the opportunity to make that determination as to whether or not the performance of the student met that learning outcome or not is right there in the interface. And it gives you a black and white choice. It's either not yet or got it. That's exactly the way they have it written inside of there. So what I'm going to be doing is I've aligned in my department, went through all the classes, and I aligned all of the assignments with the American Association of Colleges and Universities value outcomes and with the outcomes in my psychology program specific to the American Psychological Association's expectations for undergraduate education in psychology. You can tell I've probably read and said that a number of times. So I'm going to use my intro to psych class, kind of bring you through. I'm going to look at an assignment that gets graded, a discussion, and a quiz that gets graded. I'm going to show you where, if you've done that attachment like I described in the other video, this is where you're going to see how you can then evaluate that particular outcome. So we look at Brightspace, and here we are in this is the current live class. I'm going to make a really good effort to hide student names once this video goes out, but nonetheless. So just as a little bit of a review, if I go to course admin and I go to learning outcomes, you can see that these are the learning outcomes that I established within the course. This exists within all of the courses in the department. So up here are all the AAC and U ones, and then down here in 5 different categories are the learning outcomes from my program in psychology. So Intro to Psych is part of that program. So there we go. So back to the home page, we have up here assignments. And this is how we would go to grade any of these things. So we have assignments, discussions, and quizzes. And for the assignments and discussions and quizzes, I have connected learning outcomes. And I'll demonstrate that for my first one here. Let's look at assignments. And early in the semester, I have 16 individuals that have submitted their Chapter 1 assignment. If I go to edit that assignment, you can see that here's that place where I can attach those learning outcomes. And if I look at this one, I have attached the AAC&U written communication outcome and from the APA guidelines, demonstrate effective writing for different purposes. So those two, both about writing obviously, are the 2 outcomes that I have associated with this particular chapter assignment. So I close that. And then back here, now I'm going to go in and grade. So I'm going to view submissions and then click on this first one here. And that brings up this assignment for graded. So down here in the window, you can see the assignment. And over on the right-hand side, you see the options for grading. So as I scroll down, first we see my grading rubric. If I click on that, it opens up the grading rubric that I use to grade this assignment, and I can leave feedback. And then in the assignments, you will find, if you keep on scrolling down here, right there, these are the outcomes. And you see that they align with what I just showed you, the writing communication for AAC and U, and the demonstrate effective writing for different purposes. And they either got it or not yet. So I can evaluate this assignment based on the rubric, and then I can come down here and evaluate it based on whether or not it met the criteria for each one of these. Now interestingly, I have some other assignments in my class, major assignments that have 10 different learning outcomes associated with them, and I'm going to have to go and evaluate each one of those as best that I can. And interestingly, it's just two options. They didn't get it or they got it. And I think that that's probably useful, because then we don't have to really worry about the in-betweens. So they either completely got it or they got it. And we'll, again, some of this is new to all of us. And so we'll have to see what that looks like on the other end when we gather our data. So I'm going to get out of this. I'm not ready to grade that one yet. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to go into discussions. So here we are in my discussions area. And I go down to the graded discussions here. So chapter 1 discussion, that's all done for this week, and got some good participations, 60 posts in that. So if I go here and I go to assess topic, that's the way you access the grading. And what I see down here are going to be the actual opportunity to grade. So I click on this individual's particular participation. And in this case here, what you see is the standard grading rubric that I have for my discussions. And then right below that, you're going to see the outcomes right there. And they either got it or they didn't get it. If I scrolled further, that's where you see the individual post. In this, when you call it up, you'll see, in my class, you'll see the grading rubric, then you'll see the learning outcomes rubric, and then below that, you're going to see all of the posts that individual included in their online discussion. So I can look at their post and evaluate how well they did in terms of my expectations for the discussion as a learning activity in the class, and then I can also check whether or not that performance also met the learning outcomes that I aligned with that particular discussion. So as we back out of that, now we're going to go into quizzes. And in all actuality, when you're aligning the outcomes in a quiz, you can actually do it question by question. You can have multiple questions inside of a quiz, obviously. And as I mentioned in the other video, you can attach learning outcomes either to individual questions or to whole groups of questions if you're using a question bank or something like that. Most of my quizzes are short answer essay questions. A paragraph or something is my expectations, and many of my quizzes only have 1 or 2 questions in them. So let's take a look at quiz number 1. We have 18 submissions for that. So I go into grade, and here I'm going to go ahead and grade this first attempt. And as I scroll down to look at the responses here, this is only one question in this quiz where I have the student consider the 4 goals of psychology to define, explain, predict, and control, provide an example of a specific psychological problem, and how the field achieves these goals. So then the student portrayed this answer. I actually have already graded this one, and that was good enough for psychology. And then down here is the outcome for this question right there. So describe key concepts, principles, and overarching themes in psychology. If there was a second question, it'd be below that. You could grade the question, and then there'd be a space where the other learning outcome would be for each question. So the alignment of the learning outcomes inside of Brightspace is a great thing, I think, particularly if we get the kind of data that I'm hoping to get out of it. But it does imply that extra step in the everyday process of your grading, you can go in and you just determine whether or not the answer does or does not meet the learning outcome. And that's a separate component than the actual numerical grading that we're using on the assignment and how that relates to the grade in the course, which in fact is the way it's supposed to be. Those are supposed to be sort of separate processes. They can be intertwined, but they can be definitely separate. So this is my little tutorial on that. I am learning how to do this myself. I'm finding it's not that much additional work, but you do have to familiarize yourself with each one of those learning outcomes, or maybe have a guide as to those learning outcomes, so at least you can make sort of an eyeball assessment as to whether or not the assignment is meeting those criteria or not. Now, because it's a black and white determination, they either did or did not, then you're really just looking for that top-end performance. Or, depending on the flexibility of how you're approaching learning outcomes in your program, like sufficient for them to be considered to have achieved that particular outcome. So you just have to make sure that you understand your learning outcomes while you're grading, and that you provide your part-time faculty and everybody that teaches classes for you, make sure they also have an idea as to what these particular outcomes mean. I personally am rolling this out slowly. I have not yet communicated to my part-time faculty about how to assess those things, and I will be doing that, and we'll just see what kind of data we get on the other end. So, fun with learning outcomes. I hope this video was a little helpful as to what you're going to see when you start doing this, and stay tuned for more videos on other stuff. Take care.